Hello and welcome. Throughout this lesson, we've been talking a lot about the principles of creating engaging videos for learning. So I thought it might be helpful to show you an example of how I personally approach video design, specifically when I use slide decks. Whether I'm prepping for a webinar or an online course, I always try to think carefully about how my text and my visuals can work together to keep people engaged and help them retain the key information. In this video, I'm going to walk you through my process in 3 phases. First, I'm going to show you a big, overwhelming slide full of text. It's the kind that we see a lot in presentations. Then I'll break that text into smaller sections across multiple slides to keep things digestible and to help with pacing. And finally, I'm going to add visuals that reinforce what I'm saying without detracting from it. So let's start with a quick introduction to dual coding theory. So this theory explains that our brains process visual and verbal information through 2 separate channels. When these 2 modes, words and images, work together, learners are much more likely to retain the key information and to stay engaged. But if you overload both channels with too much information, like when a dense slide competes with your voice, learners tune out. The goal here is to design slides that enhance, not compete with your spoken word, and I'm going to walk you through that now. So here's where most of us start, right? A big massive wall of text on a single slide. So when I pulled up the slide, what did you start doing? I'm guessing that you immediately tried to read the slide while also listening to me speak. The problem is that our brains process both written and spoken word in the same neural center, again, dual coding theory, which leads to cognitive overload. And our audience is going to miss key points because they're trying to listen and they're trying to read, and basically they end up doing neither well. And we've all been there, right? Sitting in a presentation feeling overwhelmed because there's just too much information to absorb. So let's fix this step by step. So the first thing I want to do is break up the text into smaller chunks across multiple slides. I'm going to look for the natural transition point, which is places where the topic shifts or a new idea begins. So the first thing I do in this slide is I talk about why learning outcomes are key. I essentially give the thesis of my presentation. That's these 4 bullet points that I've highlighted. Next, I introduce a story that illustrates how learning outcomes made a course more marketable. And then finally, I transition to the outcome of that project. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to break the content into separate slides at the natural transition points. So here I talk about why learning outcomes are key, that original 4 bullet points. Then I introduce the story. And then finally, I talk about the impacts of the story. So breaking it up this way is going to give the audience time to process one idea at a time instead of overwhelming them with too much information at once. So now that we've separated the content into smaller sections, the next step is going to be cutting down the text to just the essential words. A good rule of thumb is no more than 7 words per bullet, and here's how I revise those slides. On this first slide, I cut out the extraneous words, and I broke those bullets down into sub-bullets. And I did the same thing here on the slide where I introduced the story. I've taken out the extraneous words, and I've broken down those bullets into sub-bullets. I also bolded individuals with specific challenging goals are 90% more likely to perform better because that's the key point I want folks to focus on. And I did the same thing here on the impact slide. I chopped out all the extraneous words, tried to get that down to 7 words per bullet. There's a few more in a few cases here, but this final point, when learners experience real-world success, they stay engaged and become your best advocates. That's the key point that I want folks to focus on in this slide, so I did keep that sentence intact. But hopefully you can see just with reducing the number of words on the slide and breaking up the slides into smaller chunks, you can see how much clearer that is and see how it would be easier for folks to keep focused on the points that you're trying to make instead of trying to read an entire wall of text. So at this point, you could stop here and add relevant visuals to these slides, which would already improve retention and attention, but I think we can push this further. Now I'm going to show you the final polished version of these slides as if I were delivering the webinar. Watch closely to see how the text and the visuals work together. In our experience, one of the most effective things you can do to create a best-selling course is to create strong, clear, measurable learning outcomes. Good outcomes tell your audience exactly what it is they'll be able to do once they've taken your course. As a coach, you know how crucial it is to guide your clients towards achieving specific goals. The same principle applies to online courses. Well-defined learning outcomes are essential to keeping learners focused and moving towards transformation. So think about the last time you paid for a course. You had a problem you needed to solve, right? You wanted to learn concrete skills in order to solve that problem, and that's what motivated you to get out your credit card. Let me start with a quick story from one of our recent clients, a business coach. This coach wanted to transform his one-on-one program into an online course that would allow him to scale to one-to-many. He had all the materials, workbooks, session plans, recorded webinars, but he was struggling to translate them into a structured, engaging course. Together, we worked through the backwards design process, starting with the specific outcomes he wanted his learners to achieve. Initially, he had really undefined broad goals like help participants improve their time management. We refined these into more specific and challenging outcomes like, by the end of this course, participants will design and implement a personalized weekly schedule that reduces their workload by 20% in the next 30 days. This small adjustment, adding clarity, specificity, and a measurable goal, had a huge impact. In fact, research shows that individuals with specific challenging goals are 90% more likely to perform better than those with vague or abstract goals. After launching the course, the impact was clear. Participants not only completed the course, but also shared their success stories on social media, promoting the course organically. Their ability to apply what they learned, like reducing work hours while maintaining productivity, became the course's marketing engine, driving referrals and enrollments without any additional advertising. This is why we emphasize results-driven learning outcomes. When learners experience real-world success, they stay engaged and become your best advocates. For this coach, it meant growing their business while spending less time on marketing, thanks to the power of well-designed outcomes. Let's really quickly go over the decisions I made for this final version. So splitting the text, I split that original content based on the natural transition. I really wanted to keep the presentation flowing logically, and I also didn't want to rest on one slide for too long because attention can really start to fade. I wanted to focus on a couple sentences per slide to keep the pace moving. Cutting the text. I trimmed that text down to the essential message of each slide. I really wanted to ensure that the audience was going to stay focused on my voice and not get lost in unnecessary details. I looked for just the key words that I wanted folks to focus on. And finally, I looked for images that visually reinforce the key points I'm making on each slide. For example, here when I talked about refining learning outcomes, I used a photo of a person writing on sticky notes and placing them on a whiteboard, because sticky notes to me evoke the idea of brainstorming and planning. So then when I discussed learner success stories on social media, I used a close-up of social media icons on a phone. These visuals correspond to the content that I'm talking about, while also engaging a different processing center in the brain. This is really going to help the information stick. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful as you design your own presentations. And if you'd like more guidance on creating effective presentation or building online courses, feel free to reach out.